Just off the northwestern corner of Hawthorne, a small town in western Nevada, lies a grid of abandoned roads, sidewalks leading nowhere, and crumbling foundations. These are the remains of Babbitt, a housing area for employees at the surrounding ammunition depot. Though deserted now with only one structure remaining, thousands of people once lived here. How did a disaster on the opposite side of the country and a political squabble between Nevada and California lead to the creation of a community in the high desert? How did emergency wartime housing, built as cheaply and quickly as possible, persist for 45 years? And why, even at the end, were residents reluctant to leave homes long deemed substandard? To understand why Babbitt existed, we must step back in time to 15 years before the United States entered World War II. Across the country, roughly 30 miles west of New York City, lay the Navy's Lake Denmark Ammunition Depot in New Jersey. The facility was overcrowded with munitions, much of it left over from the First World War. On July 10, 1926, a severe electrical storm started a fire that set off explosives in a temporary storehouse. This led to a chain reaction of fires and explosions. Debris from the disaster, including unexploded shells and uprooted trees, were flung miles from the site. Newspapers reported huge numbers of casualties. Modern sources put the official death toll at 19. Most of the casualties, U.S. Marines fighting the conflagration. Of the 200 buildings at the depot, 187 were damaged beyond repair. Ammunition production and storage guidelines were revised in the wake of the disaster. Henceforth, explosives were to be dispersed over much wider areas than was possible at existing depots. The Navy needed a replacement far from population centers. The search looked west as the Pacific region was becoming increasingly important to national security interests. The Navy evaluated numerous locations. Nevadans, keen to land the big federal project, suggested several sites. The mining town of Sodaville became Nevada's initial frontrunner. Then focus shifted to Hawthorne, 30 miles to the west. U.S. Senator Tasker Oddie got behind the Hawthorne proposal and lobbied hard for it. The town also happened to be the home of Nevada Governor Fred Balzar, a useful political connection. The Hawthorne site fit the Navy's criteria well. Existing rail links allowed quick shipments to naval facilities on the coast. Enemy aircraft, however, would have to fly 200 miles inland and cross multiple mountain ranges to stage an attack. And acquiring land was easy as the federal government owned more than 80% of Nevada. The Navy concurred, naming Hawthorne their preferred site. That didn't sit well with California Congressman Harry Engelbright, whose district included runner-up site Secret Valley. Engelbright pressured the Navy into reconsidering. Senator Oddie applied pressure of his own, threatening unrelated projects of great interest to California. he'd relent only if Hawthorne got the depot. Other Nevada boosters got creative. Reno photographer Roy Curtis was dispatched to Secret Valley after a heavy rainfall to show the site at its worst. Curtis reportedly ruined his shoes in the knee-deep mud, while his assistant lost his entirely. This photo, published in the Nevada State Journal, allegedly helped sway the Navy. Army and Navy explosives experts reconfirmed Hawthorne as the better choice in early 1928. Cost was a major factor, as land in California was considerably more expensive. Congress allocated $3.5 million for construction at Hawthorne on March 11th. That equates to roughly $65 million in 2025 dollars. Hawthorne was founded in 1881 by organizers of the Carson and Colorado Railroad. The town served as a water stop and repair station for trains running on narrow-gauge lines to service local mines. As mines boomed and then went bust, so Hawthorne's fortunes waxed and waned. A particularly painful blow landed in 1905. Following the Southern Pacific Railroad's acquisition of the Carson and Colorado. Hawthorne was bypassed by the S&P's new standard gauge line 7 miles north of town. By 1920, Hawthorne's population had dropped to 244 residents. To make matters worse, on July 2, 1926, fire destroyed much of Hawthorne, including most of its business district. In this aerial photo taken in the early to mid-1930s, much of the town's main street remains bare. Just 8 days after Hawthorne's devastating fire, the disaster at Lake Denmark would set in motion events that would give the town a new lease on life. Official groundbreaking for the Navy's depot at Hawthorne took place on July 24th of 1928. 2 years later, the first shipment of ordnance would arrive at the newly commissioned Naval Ammunition Depot, Hawthorne, Nevada. NAD Hawthorne for short. Locals nicknamed it the base, which it's still commonly called today. Over 300 square miles of desert were earmarked for the facility, of which 100 would eventually be developed. Between 1928 and 1945, over 2,500 munition magazines and storehouses, 212 miles of railroad track, and 418 miles of paved roads were constructed. At its peak, the depot would employ over 5,500 civilian workers. Housing was constructed for Navy officers and senior depot managers. Barracks were built for enlisted personnel, first for the U.S. Marines providing security, and later for the 3,500 sailors pressed into ordnance duties at the height of World War II. Most civilian workers, however, had to find lodging in Hawthorne. The new depot boosted the Hawthorne precinct's population to 757 by 1930, a 210% increase from a decade earlier. Over the course of the 1930s, the depot expanded multiple times, straining Hawthorne's capacity to absorb workers. Full-scale war broke out between China and Japan in 1937, and then in Europe in 1939. The Second World War was underway. The Navy accelerated expansion of NAD Hawthorne in anticipation of direct U.S. involvement in the conflict. Hawthorne was ill-prepared to handle another huge influx of workers. All manner of trailers, tents, and makeshift structures popped up around town. Even so, many workers had to adopt a practice usually reserved for mining boom camps and cramped naval vessels, that of hot bunking, with multiple men using the same bed in shifts. The Navy repurposed a former civilian conservation corps camp known as Camp Jumbo as worker barracks. More were added at a construction camp established next door, along with a mess hall and other facilities. And a trailer park was created near Hawthorne for workers who owned trailers. Together, these measures eased the housing crisis for unaccompanied workers. Workers with families, however, had no recourse but to find lodging in Hawthorne, overcrowded though it was. Naval shore facilities across the country faced similar housing shortages, as did the Army and many defense contractors. The U.S. government allocated funds for a crash program to construct inexpensive, quick-to-build housing in areas of critical need. The Navy solicited bids to construct housing near the Hawthorne Depot in January of 1941. 1 month later, the P. Neal Company of Los Angeles was awarded a contract to build 50 family housing units comprising 25 duplexes. Outwardly, the duplexes would all be identical, measuring just over 55 feet long by 27 feet wide. They conformed to one of two floor plans. Plan A contained one single-bedroom unit and one three-bedroom unit. Plan B featured two mirror-image two-bedroom units. Each unit included a main room, kitchen, and bathroom. The first contract allocated $163,000 for construction. This equates to $3,260 per duplex, or nearly $80,000 in 2025 dollars. To keep costs down and speed construction, everything was standardized. The duplexes were officially described as semi-permanent wood-frame low-cost defense housing units. Bare asbestos shingles clad the duplexes, giving the housing development a signature orangish-tan exterior. Barracks and support structures for Navy sailors, built at a nearby site dubbed Navy Side, would use the same material. These initial duplexes were constructed close to the ammunition depot's industrial and personnel area, a stone's throw from U.S. Route 95. The housing development was dubbed Babbitt Court, or Babbitt Housing Area, after Captain H.S. Babbitt. The depot's second commanding officer, Babbitt, had filled the role for 5 years rather than the customary 2. Initially, the duplexes sat on unadorned dirt lots. Furnaces, cooking ranges, and water heaters were fueled by oil. Though relatively Spartan, the accommodations were an improvement over what few could be found in overcrowded Hawthorne. One feature unique to these first duplexes was above-ground oil drums. Those that followed would have their tanks buried below ground. One of the duplexes was painted in white, possibly as a test. The other 24, and all but a handful of those that followed, would remain in bare asbestos shingles throughout Babbitt's existence. Another feature unique to these first 25 duplexes was centralized garages for residents' use. While many more duplexes would be constructed, those would remain the only garages. Before the new housing units were even occupied, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into the war. Expansion of defense-related sites accelerated, NAD Hawthorne included. 25 duplexes couldn't meet the need. The depot needed more, a lot more. In March of 1942, President Roosevelt approved a program to build additional defense worker housing, including at Babbitt. Contracts were put out to bid and awarded shortly thereafter. The number of duplexes jumped from 25 to 396, accommodating nearly 800 families. Babbitt now stretched for a full mile along U.S. Route 95, almost all the way to Hawthorne. This aerial photo from late 1942 includes the depot worker trailer park and the town of Hawthorne beyond. Retail and service space was also constructed at Babbitt's midpoint. The housing area gained a pharmacy, the largest grocery store in the county, and a post office. A few blocks south of the shopping center, a clinic was erected. Many children were born here during Babbitt's boom years. Babbitt's road system mushroomed into a grid. Roads paralleling the highway were designated as avenues, named after U.S. Navy aircraft carriers. Roads perpendicular to the highway became numbered streets. To avoid confusion with Hawthorne street numbers, which ran from 1 to 10, Babbitt Street started at 11 and ran to 31. To accommodate the garages built in 1941, the block between 12th and 13th Street was made unusually wide. The extra width also provided room for 6 duplexes to nestle in the block's interior. 3 more extra-wide residential blocks were constructed as Babbitt expanded towards Hawthorne. These may have been intended to hold additional garages, but if so, they were never built. The easternmost extra-wide block between 26th and 27th Streets was curiously devoid of residences on the interior. Black workers were joining the ammunition depot workforce by this time, many relocating from southeastern states. The Navy segregated depot work gangs by race and did the same with housing. The gap between 26th and 27th Streets marked the racial dividing line. Duplexes southeast of the gap, designated for black workers, came to be known as Colored Town. Those on the opposite side were whites only. The split was 14% black, 86% white. Colored Town duplexes were physically no different than those occupied by whites, and Babbitt businesses served all customers, but racial discrimination was rife in the area. Most Hawthorne businesses didn't serve black customers. Area schools weren't segregated, but that may have been from necessity rather than choice. Providing teachers and classrooms for the exploding student population was a struggle. Segregating students would only have made the problem worse. Even in Babbitt, blacks were often bumped from recreation spaces in favor of whites. And in interviews conducted decades later, black former residents of Babbitt described being targeted by law enforcement, including by the Marines who patrolled Babbitt. Though visually identical to the duplexes constructed in 1941, those built in 1942 incorporated various changes to speed construction and reduce costs. One modification was to make the duplexes demountable, meaning easily relocatable. This was in response to concerns emergency defense housing projects would become ghost towns following the war. By the end of 1942, the number of duplexes approached 400, potentially housing nearly 800 families. But the ammunition depot was still expanding. Babbitt's growth was far from over. By 1943, the U.S. Navy was commissioning major combat ships at the rate of nearly one per week. Demand for munitions from the expanding fleet was insatiable. NAD Hawthorne needed more workers and thus more housing. The Navy embarked on another round of Babbitt construction. 2 new avenues, again named for aircraft carriers, were added to Babbitt's southern edge. 88 new duplexes were constructed, all in the whites-only side of Babbitt. The total number of duplexes approached 500, with room for nearly 1,000 families. Babbitt also gained a nursery, cafeteria, and movie theater in 1943. The breakneck construction at Babbitt finally paused in 1944. No housing would be added that year. Additions to Babbitt resumed in 1945. One final avenue named for an aircraft carrier established Babbitt's ultimate southern boundary. A final 100 duplexes were added. 27 of them were built-in colored town, lining 27th Street. Their placement extended the racial segregation gap across Babbitt's entire width. The total number of duplexes approached 600, accommodating nearly 1,200 families. These final duplexes adopted different construction practices. In place of perimeter foundations and suspended wooden floors, a concrete slab served as both foundation and floor. Wooden strips embedded in the concrete allowed prefabricated wall sections to be quickly erected and nailed into place. Tying the walls directly into the foundation likely meant these final duplexes weren't easily relocatable like their predecessors. Linoleum floor tiles were glued directly to the concrete slab. Surviving foundations indicate all these duplexes included a closet in each kitchen, a feature that had only sporadically appeared in earlier units, according to former residents. Duplexes built in 1945 sat lower than their predecessors, their floors essentially at ground level. According to former residents, desert vermin like spiders and scorpions found the design easier to infiltrate. Babbitt amenities were upgraded as well. The shopping center received the first proper bank in Mineral County. A bowling center was constructed behind the shopping center. Like Babbitt itself, a gap divided the facility into separate spaces for blacks and whites. The final 1945 edition was a recreation hall, complete with band platform. Doors allowed dancers to spill out onto the outdoor patios.
The war to which we have devoted all the resources and all the energy of our country for more than 3.5 years has now produced total victory over all our enemies.
The end of the war in 1945 caused a sharp decline in munitions manufacturing. Yet the Hawthorne Depot remained busy for some time as thousands of tons of unused munitions returned from war theaters for storage. The Navy reduced worker housing by closing down the construction camp, trailer park, and Navy side barracks. Camp Jumbo was retained but at extremely reduced capacity. Babbitt, however, remained intact. Its population swelled as the Navy consolidated workers displaced from other sites. With an estimated 20% population increase, Babbitt exceeded Hawthorne's population by a few hundred. The immediate post-war years saw few physical changes to Babbitt. Some duplexes were converted to other uses, such as a credit union near the dispensary and a housing office near the highway. Taking advantage of the demountable design, the Navy also relocated some duplexes. One was placed near a barbecue building at the eastern edge of Babbitt to serve as a community center for black residents. The barbecue building itself was upgraded into a more permanent structure. Together, these facilities helped address a severe shortage of services and social spaces for black residents, but in doing so also further isolated them from the majority population. Other structures gained tenants or changed purpose over the years, although the timeline isn't clear. A dress shop and beauty shop opened in the shopping center. The nursery became a library. The cafeteria building at various times housed a school annex, dance studio, youth center called the Snack Shack, and ultimately a ceramics workshop. As war had driven a boom at Babbitt, peacetime inevitably brought a bust. The depot reduced employment as the glut of returning munitions slowed, and many workers left the area. By 1950, Babbitt's population was down 40% from its 1946 peak. Yet Babbitt remained larger than Hawthorne, which had shrunk by an even greater amount. The imbalance caused friction as longtime residents of the area found themselves outvoted by Babbitt's more transient population. With excess housing available, some duplexes were converted into 4-bedroom single-family residences to better serve larger families. An opening was created between the two sides, with one of the two kitchens converted into a utility room. Despite a shrinking population, the Navy continued to invest in Babbitt. An existing carpentry shop behind the clinic was supplemented by electric, gas, paint, and other maintenance facilities. And a hobby shop was added next to the recreation center, equipped with tools for use by residents. But many units emptied out and were boarded up to deter vandalism. Alfalfa was grown between Babbitt and Highway 95 and on empty blocks in the interior. According to former Babbitt residents, the alfalfa was grown to feed the mounts of U.S. Marines who patrolled Navy-controlled areas on horseback. Rows of trees were also planted around the periphery, shielding Babbitt from the area's high winds. A tree planting program was initiated. Together with improvements made by tenants, the greenery helped Babbitt resemble a typical suburban housing development. Growing all this greenery in the desert required water.
A reservoir is a vessel and holds water. Captain Richter, his aide, and Beverly Sayre officiate as the Hawthorne Naval Ammunition Depot's Black Beauty is christened in real nautical style. The lake will provide 50 million gallons of water for personnel at this Navy base far from the bounding main. USS Black Beauty, a big vessel far from the ocean, holds water, as does our story. Down the hatch.
Reservoirs in the nearby mountains fed underground water pipelines, leading to large metal irrigation spouts, which were a common sight around Babbitt. The housing area even had its own police force, sharing law enforcement duties with the Marines. Residents referred to them as Babbitt Rabbits. Tenants were subject to a multitude of regulations. The government could force residents to vacate with no notice for reasons as vague as undesirable character. Security or medical officers would enter homes at any time if they deemed it necessary, and loss of employment at the depot meant eviction. Some commanding officers allowed non-depot employees to rent in Babbitt, typically teachers and healthcare workers. Others didn't. As the CO changed every 2 years, Babbitt residency was tenuous for non-depot tenants. In May of 1950, Hawthorne celebrated the first ever Armed Forces Day, which has remained the area's largest annual event ever since. After marching through Hawthorne's business district, the parade continued all the way down to central Babbitt for the opening of a new grassy park in front of the shopping center, constructed by the United States Naval Construction Battalions, better known as the Seabees. It was named CB Park in their honor. The event was marked with speeches from a variety of dignitaries, including Depot Commander Captain J.S. Crenshaw and Nevada Governor Vale Pittman. One month later, the start of the Korean War caused a new hiring boom at NAD Hawthorne to boost munitions production. The Navy reactivated mothballed Babbitt duplexes to handle the influx of workers. Still more housing was deemed necessary, and 100 units were constructed under Title III of the 1949 American Housing Act. The new development, known as Title III after its funding source, utilized the empty southwestern corner of the Babbitt plot. 65 two-bedroom and 35 three-bedroom homes were added. Nearly complete front and back halves of houses built elsewhere arrived by truck to be mounted on pylons. Work on site was more module assembly than traditional construction. Most everything about the Title III development broke from Babbitt convention. Single-family homes were built rather than duplexes. Exteriors were painted instead of clad in bare shingles. Roads curved rather than following the established grid system, and were named after prominent Navy officers. Despite utilizing time-saving techniques, the The housing wasn't ready for occupancy before the Korean conflict ended in mid-1953. The units still weren't quite finished when a severe windstorm in early 1954 ripped roofs off of some. Others were damaged by flying debris. Nevada Congressman Cliff Young inspected the damage, noting signs of shoddy construction and the use of incorrect materials. He demanded a full investigation. Quality concerns made depot employees reluctant to accept the units even after the immediate issues had been addressed. Despite the troubles, this moment in time marked peak Babbitt. Combined, the World War II duplexes and Title III houses provided up to 1,272 individual units, with over 2,500 bedrooms between them. Around this time, a variety of enhancements were made to Babbitt. Tennis courts and a basketball court were added. A proper baseball field was constructed, hosting both Little League and adult games. There was also a laundry. In 1956, a primary school was added to Babbitt's Central District. In many ways, Babbitt boasted better amenities than Hawthorne. Gambling, illegal on government property, was a notable exception. Community members got involved in beautifying the area, like these boys participating in a cleanup drive. The tennis courts, recreation center, bowling alley, and bank can be seen in the background. Afterwards, the cleanup crew was rewarded with soda pop at the back of the grocery store. But as the decade wore on, the boom turned to bust again. Between 1956 and 1959, the number of civilian jobs at NAD Hawthorne dropped from 1,600 to 928, a 42% loss. The ammunition depot no longer needed 1,000+ civilian housing units of its own, and it never would again. By 1960, Babbitt's population had dropped to 2,159, below that of Hawthorne. Compared to its 1946 peak, Babbitt residency was down 50%, while the quantity of housing was up. The Navy consolidated most residents into the blocks closest to Highway 95. Roughly corresponding to Babbitt's borders at the end of 1942. Colored Town and the gap between black and white housing were retained, for the time being. Duplexes in the shuttered areas were declared surplus. Their demountable design allowed their removal rather than destruction. The duplexes were offered first to other arms of the federal government, then to state and local agencies. Mineral County took advantage to obtain structures for the Hawthorne Library, School District, maintenance yard, and other uses. Unclaimed duplexes were then offered for private purchase. The upfront price was attractive, but buyers' real costs lay in relocation. The Title III housing area was also retained, but with just 49 of the 100 original structures, former Title III residents confirmed the interior blocks were empty no later than the mid-1960s. Given the glut of housing following the Korean War and damage from the 1954 windstorm, the missing 51 houses may have been removed shortly after construction. The Babbitt Theater was also gone by this time. Its concrete foundations remained for many years, becoming a favorite haunt of children on bicycles and skateboards. Babbitt's bust continued over the course of the 1960s. With the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Navy could no longer practice overt housing discrimination. The remaining blocks of Colored Town were among the next batch of duplexes deleted. Remaining black residents integrated into formerly whites-only areas of Babbitt. Most were assigned units east of the shopping center, near the former Colored Town site. Whether the Navy intentionally concentrated black residents there or that was simply where units were available isn't known. Just under 300 duplexes remained by the end of the 1960s. Based on these photos from the Hunter family, this appears to be when the duplex's chimneys were removed. All Babbitt duplexes were originally built with chimneys surrounding the heater exhausts. Earlier duplexes received rectangular chimneys, while later ones had smaller, square chimneys. The chimney structures were removed from nearly all remaining duplexes, leaving exhaust ducts sticking out high above smooth roofs. This modification was the only significant change to duplex exteriors ever made at Babbitt. The Vietnam War swung NAD Hawthorne from bust to boom in the late 1960s. Hiring resumed, and with Babbitt half dismantled, the Navy found itself with a shortage of available worker housing. "100 new housing units were planned, comprising 50 duplexes. Half were built on base for military families. The other 25 for civilians were built off base. Previously, this would have resulted in another boom for Babbitt. This time, though, the Navy chose to build the civilian housing at the former Camp Jumbo site. Why select that isolated location when Babbitt had ample room, existing infrastructure, and better access to amenities? According to locals, the new modern duplexes were earmarked for high-grade civil service employees. Placing them next to low-cost, aging, substandard Babbitt housing was seen as undesirable. The road serving the new development was named Schweer Drive, after the depot's commanding officer. Captain Schweer did oversee at least one addition to Babbitt, however. Like many other parks around the country at the time, CB Park gained a rocket play structure in 1967 to inspire children towards careers in space. Schweer cut the ribbon. A larger Babbitt addition during the 1960s came from a different service. Following successful tests of a mobile radar bomb scoring site at the depot, the U.S. Air Force placed a permanent facility in Babbitt. The big white radums were nicknamed the golf balls. Holiday decorations were applied on occasion. The facility was built at the site of the former segregation gap that had racially divided Babbitt. At least one family was displaced from an adjacent duplex the Air Force wanted to use. The bombing of Hawthorne became part of everyday life, with B-52 bombers on training runs a common sight over the valley. In 1968, the depot's executive officer announced the intention to construct a further 200 modern housing units. With them, he anticipated the remaining Babbitt housing could be eliminated entirely. But budget reductions in 1969 forced the depot to cut back in all areas. The Navy never built any more worker housing for the Hawthorne Depot. Babbitt soldiered on. Employment at NAD Hawthorne dropped even further when the United States withdrew from Vietnam in 1973. Predictably, Babbitt's population dropped as well. Families were leaving Babbitt for other reasons too. An increasing number opted for newer, better appointed housing just up the road in Hawthorne, even though it cost more. Residents weren't the only ones leaving. Safeway, the chain that had occupied Babbitt's grocery building for many years, moved to a new facility at the edge of Hawthorne. Babbitt's days as a hub of economic activity were over. Once again, the Navy reduced Babbitt's active footprint. The new swaths of unused duplexes were boarded up but remained in place for years. On paper, this kept 156 duplexes active, plus the 49 remaining single-family homes in the Title III area, but the number of usable units was lower. The Navy had long since ceased repairing badly damaged Babbitt housing. Structures with issues were either mothballed or removed. Peppering the still active area with sporadic empty lots and boarded-up duplexes. The numerous roads lined with boarded-up housing attracted unwanted attention, vandals, teens looking for places to drink or smoke, and even local youths armed with movie cameras filming their own science fiction epic. The Navy did continue to make improvements in Babbitt. For example, above-ground propane tanks for the Title III houses were replaced by pipelines. But external factors stopped this project before it was fully buttoned up. In 1977, the Department of Defense's Single Manager for Conventional Ammunition Directive took effect. Most of the Navy's ammunition facilities were transferred to the U.S. Army, Hawthorne included. On October 1st of that year, NAD Hawthorne became the Hawthorne Army Ammunition Plant. The first visible effect was removal of the Marine Detachment, providing security at the depot and Babbitt. They were replaced by a private firm contracted by the Army. Before the decade was out, Babbitt's Title III housing area was shut down by the Army, despite its recent upgrade. The Navy had built 3 sister depots to NAD Hawthorne. Ammunition production and storage facilities at those still operating were also transferred to the Army in 1977. All had faced worker housing shortages during the Second World War, and solutions similar to Babbitt were implemented at 2 of them. A standalone housing community named Crane Village was built to serve NAD Crane in Indiana. At NAD Hastings in Nebraska, a housing development named Spencer Park was added to the town of Hastings. In both its Navy and Army guises, The Hawthorne Depot is claimed to be the largest facility of its kind, but competing claims exist for the other large former naval ammunition depots. Like the fictional Lake Wobegon, where all the children were above average, it appears all of the NADs were the biggest and the best. Babbitt made news several times in 1980. In May, it was one of many military-owned sites evaluated to house 1,500 or more refugees from the Cuban boat lift. Nothing came of it, possibly due to the amount of work needed to render long-shuttered duplexes habitable again. Also in May, Nevada U.S. Senator Howard Cannon promised to introduce special legislation to transfer ownership of Babbitt to Mineral County at minimal cost. He hoped to bypass the typically lengthy review process so the housing could be used to support a mining boom in the area. In December, operation of the ammunition plant was taken over by a civilian contractor. Most military personnel departed. Civil service workers, who made up most of Babbitt's population, faced a difficult choice. Hiring on with the contractor meant giving up government benefits, including pensions. Retaining those benefits required taking jobs elsewhere. Many chose the latter. The exodus from Babbitt and Hawthorne is reflected in Mineral County High School yearbooks, with graduating class sizes dropping by a third over the next 3 years. Over the next few years, the contractor shifted most ammunition production to other facilities. The Hawthorne plant's focus turned towards storage and disposal of surplus ammunition, a process known as demilitarization. More Babbitt tenants left as their jobs disappeared. The shuttered duplexes east of the shopping center were removed, as were all remaining Title III houses. 4 blocks of boarded-up duplexes were retained in addition to the 9 blocks remaining active. In 1984, Senator Cannon's 4-year-old quick transfer effort for Babbitt came to a fruitless end. The federal government required standard processes be followed to ensure it received fair market value for Babbitt assets. The first step was to declare Babbitt excess property in 1985. Next, the site and remaining structures were offered to other federal agencies. No takers were found. Babbitt assets would be sold to the highest bidders, denying Mineral County the opportunity to acquire the land and remaining structures in a package deal. Babbitt's post office was shuttered in early April of 1987. The 16 remaining Babbitt tenants were given until June 1st to vacate. Many had lived there for decades and left reluctantly, despite having lost nearly all their neighbors. Photos from former resident Bud Harrison, who returned to visit shortly before Babbitt closed down entirely, give a glimpse of the final days. His family's former duplex still stood, boarded up since the 1970s. "45 years after the first residents arrived at a small cluster of buildings in the middle of the desert, the last tenants vacated the property. Babbitt, like many other former boom towns, was history. Buyers snapped up the duplexes quickly. Taking possession, though, was another matter. Jacking a duplex off its foundation and trucking it away was a time-consuming process, and hundreds needed to be done. Many buyers found their plans stymied when the state of Nevada stopped issuing permits, allowing the transportation of Babbitt duplexes by highway. Unable to move their purchases out of the area, some buyers defaulted. Lack of cooperation between the Army and General Services Administration exacerbated the situation, placing additional roadblocks in buyers' way. These photographs come from a historic American building survey of Babbitt conducted in 1992 by the National Park Service. All of the service structure still stood, and many duplexes are still visible in the background. During the dismantling process, former residents staged a funeral for Babbitt in front of the bowling center. Babbitt had been home, and they'd never be able to go home again. The final duplex was removed from the site in 1994, a full 7 years after the housing community shut down. The shopping center and most other remaining structures were demolished in the mid to late 1990s. Only the school building, water tower, and bowling center soldiered on. The latter, the only bowling facility in the county, remained in operation until 2004. It was torn down shortly afterwards. The water tower, Babbitt's most visible landmark, was brought down in 2009. Only the school building, the final structure erected in Babbitt, stands as of 2025. It's now under private ownership as part of a religious boarding school complex. Foundations remain for some other structures. The most substantial are those of the bowling alley. A short distance to the north lie slab foundations of the shopping center. Slab foundations also remain for the barbecue building, tennis courts, and some of the maintenance shops. The only visible housing remains are slab foundations from duplexes constructed in 1945. These retain the embedded wooden strips for mounting interior walls, revealing the internal layout. According to a former Babbitt housing office employee, the perimeter foundations of all other duplexes were pushed in and then bulldozed over. The locations of some of those duplexes can be inferred from remaining sidewalk and porch slabs. Few of those remain for much of the western side of Babbitt, including the Title III housing. Most sidewalk slabs from this area were repurposed to refresh the giant letter H on a hill west of Hawthorne. Mineral County fulfilled its long-delayed ambition to purchase the Babbitt site in 1998, though cleared of structures other than the school. Since then, the county sought to redevelop the land. An RV park opened on the former site of the U.S. Air Force radar installation in the early 2000s. And a casino with sports bar opened in 2019 at the northeastern corner of the former Babbitt site, near the foundations of the old barbecue building. Further redevelopment was delayed due to concerns about the condition of the site. A 2009 EPA assessment of the soil confirmed the presence of asbestos from disintegrated shingles, as well as contamination from DDT usage. Mineral County was awarded a $1.5 million EPA grant to clean up the former Babbitt site. Soil remediation occurred in 2025. And a couple of new buildings have gone up at the northwestern corner of the site. At the location where the very first Babbitt duplexes were constructed in 1941. County officials hope the cleanup brings renewed interest and a brighter future of the land that once was Babbitt. Though the Babbitt site itself was cleared, the demountable duplexes were mostly relocated rather than destroyed. The fate of the Title III houses is unclear, and if any still exist, photographic proof hasn't surfaced. Surviving duplexes, though, can be found in great abundance. Telltale features allow a seasoned observer to differentiate between buildings that started out as Babbitt duplexes and unrelated gable roof structures of similar size. Many duplexes traveled only a mile or so up the road to Hawthorne. Those shown here represent only a fraction of the total that exists in and around Hawthorne. Many other structures in the area are probably Babbitt duplexes at their core, but extensive remodeling and additions make positive identification difficult. Several pieces of playground equipment from Babbitt CB Park can also be found in Hawthorne at Lions Park. But traces of Babbitt can be found far beyond Hawthorne. Former Babbitt duplexes have been confirmed by photographs at the town of Walker Lake, a 12-mile journey by road. Luning, 25 miles. Mina, 34 miles. A concentration at Schurz on the Walker River Indian Reservation, 34 miles. Gabbs, 55 miles. Yerington, 56 miles. Fallon, 71 miles. The Yamba Indian Reservation, 89 miles. Silver Peak, 91 miles. Tonopah, 103 miles. A neighborhood of Babbitt duplexes was established here to house employees of Sandia National Labs in the 1960s. Dixie Valley, 127 miles. Goldfield, 130 miles. The greatest concentration lies east of Highway 95 at the north end of town. The Carvers and Round Mountain area, 165 miles. Ely, 275 miles, where several Babbitt duplexes are in use by the school district. Spring Valley, 329 miles. Relocated Babbitt duplexes have been reported even further afield, in California and Arizona, but photographic confirmation has yet to surface. Babbitt, it turns out, didn't so much disappear as disperse. When traveling through the region, take a second glance at any rectangular gable roof structure you pass. You may just have spotted a piece of World War II domestic front history, one that's endured far longer than anyone expected.